Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. I'm Dr. Andrew Whitmore, and I've been an intensive care physician at Royal Melbourne Hospital in Australia for over 18 years. During that time, I've treated thousands of critically ill patients, witnessed countless recoveries and losses, and thought I understood the boundary between life and death. I was wrong. The case I'm about to tell you about shattered everything I believed about brain death, consciousness, and what it truly means to be alive. It's the reason I submitted my resignation last month and why I can no longer practice intensive care medicine. Royal Melbourne Hospital is one of Australia's premier medical institutions, with a 42-bed ICU that handles the most complex critical care cases in Victoria. As the senior attending physician, I've overseen cases ranging from multi-organ failure to severe traumatic brain injuries. In my years of practice, I've had to make the difficult decision to declare brain death in dozens of patients, always following the strict neurological criteria established by Australian medical law. Until March 15, 2023, I never questioned those protocols. The case began on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday evening. Emily Harrington, a 28-year-old primary school teacher from suburban Melbourne, was brought to our emergency department following a massive car accident on the Monash Freeway. According to witness reports, her vehicle had been struck head-on by a drunk driver traveling at approximately 120 kilometers per hour. The impact was so severe that it took emergency responders nearly 2 hours to extract her from the wreckage. When Emily arrived at our trauma bay at 9:47 p.m., her condition was beyond critical. She had sustained massive head trauma with a Glasgow coma scale of 3, the lowest possible score. Her pupils were fixed and dilated, showing no response to light. CT scans revealed extensive bilateral brain hemorrhaging, severe cerebral edema, and what appeared to be irreversible damage to her brainstem. The neurosurgical team performed an emergency craniotomy to relieve intracranial pressure, but the prognosis was grim. Dr. Laura Kensington, our head of neurosurgery, pulled me aside after the surgery. "Andrew, I've been doing this for 25 years. And I've never seen brain trauma this extensive in a patient who survived the initial impact. The damage is catastrophic. Even if we can stabilize her, the likelihood of meaningful recovery is essentially zero." Emily was transferred to our ICU on full life support, mechanical ventilation, continuous cardiac monitoring, and multiple vasopressor medications to maintain her blood pressure. Her family, including her husband James and her parents, maintained a constant vigil beside her bed, hoping for a miracle that, from a medical standpoint, seemed impossible. Over the next 72 hours, Emily's condition continued to deteriorate. Despite our aggressive interventions, her intracranial pressure remained dangerously elevated. Serial neurological examinations showed no improvement in her brainstem reflexes. She had no corneal reflex, no gag reflex, and no response to painful stimuli. Most concerning, her brain imaging studies showed progressive tissue death throughout her cerebral cortex and brainstem. On Friday, March 18th, I made the decision to begin the formal brain death evaluation process. In Australia, brain death determination requires comprehensive testing by 2 independent physicians, including specific assessments of brainstem function and confirmatory tests such as cerebral angiography or nuclear medicine flow studies. Dr. Thomas Callahan, our senior neurologist, joined me for the initial assessment. We conducted the standard battery of tests: pupillary reflexes, corneal reflexes, oculocephalic reflexes, oculovestibular reflexes, and the apnea test. Every single examination was consistent with complete brainstem death. Emily showed no spontaneous respiratory effort when temporarily disconnected from the ventilator, even with CO2 levels elevated to 60 millimeters of mercury, well above the threshold that should trigger breathing in any living person. "The findings are unambiguous," Dr. Callahan told me after we completed the testing. "This patient meets all criteria for brain death under Australian law. There is no detectable brain function. As required by protocol, we waited 24 hours before conducting the second confirmatory examination. During this waiting period, I spent considerable time with Emily's family, explaining the medical realities of her condition and preparing them for the inevitable conclusion that would come with the second brain death examination. James, Emily's husband of 3 years, was struggling to accept what we were telling him. "She looks like she's just sleeping," he said, holding her hand. "Her heart is still beating. How can you say she's dead?" I gently explained the difference between cardiac death and brain death, how the ventilator was artificially maintaining her breathing and circulation, but that the organ that made Emily who she was, her brain, had ceased to function entirely. It's a conversation I'd had hundreds of times before, but it never became easier. "The Emily you knew and loved is gone," I told him. "The machines are keeping her body alive, but there is no consciousness, no awareness, no hope of recovery. When we complete the second examination tomorrow, we'll be legally required to declare her brain dead." On Saturday, March 19th at 2 p.m., Dr. Callahan and I conducted the second brain death examination. The results were identical to the first: complete absence of all brainstem reflexes, no spontaneous respiratory effort, and no response to any stimuli. We also performed a nuclear medicine brain flow study, which showed no blood flow to any part of Emily's brain, definitive confirmation of brain death. At 3:15 p.m. on March 19th, 2023, I officially declared Emily Harrington brain dead according to Australian medical and legal standards. The documentation was completed, the death certificate was prepared, and arrangements were made to discuss organ donation with the family. From both a medical and legal standpoint, Emily Harrington was dead. What happened next defies every principle of neuroscience and medicine I learned during my training and career. The family requested one final night to say goodbye before we disconnected life support. This is a common and understandable request, and we always honor it when possible. Emily remained on the ventilator in the ICU, her body artificially maintained while her family processed their grief and made final arrangements. At approximately 4:30 a.m. on Sunday, March 20th, night nurse Rebecca Dawson contacted me at home. Her voice was shaking with confusion and something close to fear. "Dr. Whitmore, you need to come in immediately. It's about Emily Harrington." "What's the issue, Rebecca? Has the family decided on organ donation?" "No, doctor. She opened her eyes. She's looking at me." I was certain I had misheard. "Rebecca, that's impossible. Emily Harrington was declared brain dead yesterday. Any movements you're seeing are spinal reflexes, which can persist even after brain death." "Dr. Whitmore, I've been a critical care nurse for 15 years. I know the difference between spinal reflexes and conscious movement. This patient is tracking my voice with her eyes. When I ask her to blink, she blinks. This isn't reflexive movement." I drove to the hospital in a state of disbelief, convinced that the night nurse was misinterpreting normal post-mortem phenomena. Brain death is irreversible by definition. The extensive testing we had performed left no room for error. What Rebecca was describing was medically impossible. When I arrived at Emily's bedside at 5:15 a.m., I encountered something that challenged every fundamental principle of medicine I had ever learned. Emily Harrington's eyes were open, bright, and undeniably alert. When I entered her field of vision, her eyes immediately focused on me and tracked my movement across the room. "Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "can you hear me?" She blinked once, deliberately and purposefully. "Emily, if you can understand me, blink twice." She blinked twice. I stood there in shock, staring at a patient I had legally declared dead 14 hours earlier. This wasn't a case of premature diagnosis or missed signs of recovery. Emily had undergone the most rigorous brain death evaluation possible, conducted by 2 senior physicians following strict medical protocols. Every test had confirmed complete cessation of brain function. I immediately contacted Dr. Callahan and Dr. Kensington, requesting they come to the hospital for an emergency consultation. While waiting for them to arrive, I conducted a preliminary neurological assessment of Emily's current condition. The results were extraordinary. Emily now demonstrated clear evidence of consciousness and awareness. Her pupils, which had been fixed and dilated for days, now responded normally to light. She had spontaneous eye movements, appropriate responses to verbal commands, and even crude attempts at communication despite the endotracheal tube preventing speech. When Dr. Callahan arrived, his reaction mirrored my own disbelief. "This is medically impossible," he said after examining Emily. "We performed comprehensive brain death testing less than 24 hours ago. Every parameter confirmed complete brainstem death." Dr. Kensington was equally stunned. "I've never seen anything like this in my entire career. This patient had massive, irreversible brain damage. The CT scans showed extensive tissue death throughout her brain. This level of recovery should be impossible. We immediately ordered emergency brain imaging studies. The results were perhaps even more shocking than Emily's apparent resurrection. The CT scan showed remarkable resolution of the cerebral edema that had been present since her accident. Areas of the brain that had appeared necrotic and irreversibly damaged now showed normal tissue density and structure. "It's as if her brain has regenerated itself," Dr. Kensington said, staring at the side-by-side comparison of the pre- and post-death scans. "I've never seen anything like this in 30 years of neurosurgery." Over the following days, Emily's neurological recovery continued at an unprecedented rate. The endotracheal tube was removed, and she was able to speak clearly and coherently. Her cognitive function appeared intact. She remembered her name, her family, her job, and events from before the accident. Most remarkably, she had no memory of the 5 days she had spent dead in our ICU. "The last thing I remember is driving home from work on Tuesday," she told me. "There was a car coming toward me very fast, and then nothing. What day is it now?" When we explained that she had been in a coma for 5 days and had actually been declared brain dead, Emily's reaction was one of calm acceptance rather than distress. "I remember feeling very peaceful," she said, "like I was floating in warm water. I knew something was happening, but I wasn't afraid." The medical implications of Emily's case were staggering. We had documented brain death using every available diagnostic tool, yet the patient had somehow recovered complete neurological function. This wasn't a case of near-death experience or misdiagnosis. It was a fundamental challenge to our understanding of consciousness, brain death, and the nature of life itself. Dr. Callahan and I spent hours reviewing the case documentation, searching for any error in our brain death determination. We found none. Every test had been performed correctly, every protocol had been followed precisely, and every result had been unambiguously consistent with brain death. "Either our understanding of brain death is fundamentally flawed," Dr. Callahan said, "or we've witnessed something that exists beyond the current boundaries of medical science." News of Emily's recovery spread rapidly through the hospital and soon attracted attention from medical professionals worldwide. Neurologists, intensive care specialists, and researchers from major medical centers requested access to her case files. The Australian Medical Association initiated a formal review of the case, and several international medical journals expressed interest in publishing case reports. But the attention also brought scrutiny and skepticism. Some colleagues suggested that we had made errors in our brain death determination, despite the meticulous documentation that proved otherwise. Others proposed that Emily had been in an extremely deep coma that mimicked brain death, but could not explain how this would account for the absence of blood flow to her brain confirmed by nuclear imaging. Dr. Patricia Walsh, a neurologist from the University of Melbourne, offered a theory that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. There are documented cases throughout medical history of patients recovering from what appeared to be death, she explained during a case conference. While rare, these events suggest that our understanding of consciousness and brain function may be incomplete. Perhaps what we call brain death is not the absolute end of neurological activity, but rather a state of profound suspension that can, under extremely rare circumstances, be reversed. The most disturbing aspect of Emily's case wasn't just the medical impossibility of her recovery, it was what it implied about other patients. If Emily could recover from documented brain death, how many other patients had we prematurely declared dead? How many organ donations had we facilitated from patients who might have had the potential for recovery? These questions tormented me in the weeks following Emily's miraculous resurrection. Every brain death declaration I had made throughout my career was now cast in doubt. Had I condemned patients to death who might have recovered if given more time? The weight of this possibility was crushing. Emily was discharged from the hospital 3 weeks after her death, neurologically intact and able to return to her normal life. Follow-up brain imaging continued to show normal structure and function. From a medical standpoint, her recovery was complete and permanent. But the case had a profound effect on our ICU team. Several nurses requested transfers to other units, unable to reconcile what they had witnessed with their understanding of medicine. Dr. Callahan took a leave of absence to process the implications of this case for my practice. Dr. Kensington became extremely cautious about declaring brain death, extending observation periods, and ordering additional confirmatory tests beyond what was required by protocol. For me, the case represented a fundamental crisis of confidence in everything I thought I knew about my profession. If the most basic determination we make, the difference between life and death, could be wrong, what did that say about the entire foundation of critical care medicine? The psychological impact on Emily's family was equally complex. While they were obviously overjoyed by her recovery, they struggled with the knowledge that their wife and daughter had been legally dead for 14 hours. James described the experience as having to grieve for someone who was still alive. "It's made us question everything," Emily's mother told me during a follow-up visit. "If the doctors can be wrong about something as basic as whether someone is alive or dead, what else might they be wrong about?" 3 months after Emily's discharge, I received a call that would further complicate my understanding of the case. Dr. Catherine Winslow, a colleague from Sydney's Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, contacted me about a similar case they had recently encountered. "We have a 34-year-old man who was declared brain dead following a massive stroke," she explained. "Full neurological workup, confirmatory testing, the works. But 12 hours after we declared him dead, he opened his eyes and started following commands. I heard about your case and wondered if you might consult on this patient." The possibility that Emily's case wasn't unique, that other patients might be experiencing similar recoveries from brain death, was both fascinating and terrifying. If this was a previously unrecognized phenomenon, it had massive implications for organ donation protocols, end-of-life care, and our fundamental understanding of consciousness. I declined Dr. Winslow's request for consultation. By that point, I had already made the decision to leave intensive care medicine. The certainties that had guided my practice for 18 years had been shattered, and I could no longer make life and death decisions with the confidence that patients and families deserved. In my resignation letter to the hospital administration, I wrote, "Recent experiences have led me to question fundamental assumptions about brain death and consciousness that underlie critical care practice. Until the medical community can provide better answers about these phenomena, I cannot in good conscience continue to make determinations about brain death." 6 months after Emily's recovery, she returned to work as a primary school teacher. She appears to be completely healthy, with no residual effects from her accident or her temporary death. She has become something of a medical celebrity, participating in research studies and speaking at medical conferences about her experience. "I don't understand what happened to me from a scientific perspective," she told an audience of neurologists at a recent symposium. "But I know that I was somewhere else for a while, somewhere peaceful, and then I came back. Maybe death isn't as final as we think it is." The case of Emily Harrington continues to challenge medical orthodoxy and raise profound questions about consciousness, death, and the limits of human understanding. Research is ongoing at several major medical centers to investigate similar cases and develop better diagnostic criteria for brain death. But Emily's story was only the beginning of what would become the most disturbing series of events in my medical career. 3 weeks after Emily's discharge, I received another call from Dr. Winslow in Sydney. "Andrew, we've had 2 more cases. Both patients declared brain dead. Both recovered within 24 hours. What the hell is happening?" The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Over the next 6 months, similar cases were reported from hospitals across Australia and New Zealand. A 45-year-old construction worker in Perth, a 19-year-old university student in Auckland, a 67-year-old grandmother in Brisbane, all declared brain dead following proper protocols, all recovering consciousness within 12 to 48 hours of declaration. The Australian Medical Association convened an emergency committee to investigate these cases. I was asked to serve as a consulting expert given my direct experience with the phenomenon. What we discovered was deeply troubling. When we reviewed historical medical records going back 20 years, we found scattered reports of similar cases that had been dismissed as diagnostic errors or inadequate brain death protocols. A pattern emerged. Approximately 1 in every 500 brain death declarations resulted in unexpected recovery. These cases had been buried in hospital files, written off as anomalies, or simply not reported to avoid legal complications. "We're looking at a systematic failure in our understanding of brain death," Dr. Margaret Foster, the committee chair, told our group. "Either our diagnostic criteria are fundamentally flawed, or there's a neurobiological process occurring that we don't understand." The legal implications were staggering. Families of patients who had been declared brain dead and whose organs had been harvested began filing lawsuits against hospitals. Organ donation programs were suspended pending investigation. The entire framework of end-of-life care in intensive care units was thrown into chaos. But the personal toll on medical professionals was even more devastating. Dr. Callahan never returned from his leave of absence. He sent me a letter explaining that he could no longer practice medicine, knowing that he might have facilitated organ harvesting from patients who weren't truly dead. "I keep thinking about the 23 brain death declarations I made in my career," he wrote. "How many of those patients might have recovered if we had waited longer? The guilt is unbearable." I began experiencing similar doubts about every patient I had ever treated. Sleep became impossible as I replayed cases from throughout my career, wondering which patients I might have condemned to premature death. The weight of uncertainty was crushing. The psychological impact extended beyond individual physicians to entire medical teams. Nurses reported anxiety and depression at rates far above normal. Several hospitals saw mass resignations from ICU staff. The confidence that is essential for critical care medicine had been shattered. Meanwhile, research into the phenomenon intensified. Dr. Samantha Reid, a neurologist from the University of Sydney, proposed a revolutionary theory about consciousness and brain death that challenged centuries of medical understanding. What if consciousness isn't localized solely in the brain, she hypothesized during a medical conference in Melbourne. What if there are quantum-level processes occurring in neural tissue that we can't detect with our current technology? These patients might exist in a state of suspended animation rather than true death. Her theory was controversial and largely dismissed by mainstream medicine, but it offered the only plausible explanation for what we were witnessing. Traditional neuroscience simply had no framework for understanding how extensively damaged brain tissue could spontaneously regenerate and restore function. The international medical community took notice of the Australian cases. The New England Journal of Medicine published a special issue devoted to consciousness after brain death. Researchers from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and the Mayo Clinic traveled to Australia to study the affected patients. Emily Harrington became the subject of extensive research studies. Brain imaging using the most advanced MRI technology available showed her neural networks functioning normally, with no evidence of the massive damage that had been documented during her hospitalization. It was as if her brain had completely regenerated itself at a cellular level. From a neurobiological standpoint, "What happened to Emily is impossible," explained Dr. William Ashford, a neuroscientist from Harvard who came to study her case. "Brain tissue doesn't regenerate like this. Dead neurons don't come back to life. Yet here we have documented evidence of exactly that occurring." The research team conducted extensive cognitive testing on Emily and the other recovered patients. Their results were remarkable. Not only had these patients recovered completely, but many showed enhanced cognitive abilities compared to their pre-accident baselines. Memory formation, processing speed, and problem-solving skills all tested above average. "It's as if the near-death experience somehow optimized their brain function," Dr. Ashford observed. "We're seeing improvements in areas of cognition that shouldn't be possible after such severe trauma." But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came when researchers interviewed the recovered patients about their experiences during brain death. Every single patient reported similar phenomena: a sense of floating above their body, awareness of medical procedures being performed, and detailed recollections of conversations that occurred while they were declared dead. Emily described watching the second brain death examination from above, seeing Dr. Callahan and me performing the tests that would legally declare her dead. "I could see everything happening," she told the research team. "I wanted to tell you I was still there, but I couldn't move or speak. It was like being trapped inside my own body." These accounts raised profound ethical questions about patient awareness during brain death determination. If these patients retained consciousness during the process, what did that mean for our understanding of suffering and medical intervention? Were we subjecting conscious patients to procedures while believing them to be dead? The implications for organ donation were particularly troubling. Several of the recovered patients reported being aware during discussions about organ harvesting, hearing medical staff and family members planning the removal of their organs while they remained conscious but unable to communicate. "I heard them talking about which organs would be viable for transplant," said Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old who had recovered from brain death in Adelaide. "I was screaming inside my head, trying to tell them I was still alive, but no one could hear me. It was the most terrifying experience of my life." The organ donation system in Australia was effectively paralyzed by these revelations. Families who had previously consented to organ donation now refused, unwilling to risk the possibility that their loved ones might recover. Transplant programs faced severe organ shortages as public confidence in brain death protocols collapsed. Hospital administrators struggled to develop new policies for brain death determination. Some institutions extended observation periods from 24 hours to a week or more. Others required additional confirmatory tests beyond what was mandated by law. The result was increased uncertainty and longer periods of emotional torture for families. My own practice became untenable. Every brain death evaluation I conducted was fraught with doubt and second-guessing. Family members would reference Emily's case, demanding extended observation periods and additional testing. The clarity and certainty that had once guided my medical decisions was gone. The final straw came 6 months after Emily's recovery, when I was asked to evaluate a 16-year-old boy who had suffered massive head trauma in a motorcycle accident. The case was identical to Emily's: extensive brain damage, absent brainstem reflexes, and all clinical indicators of brain death. As I stood beside the boy's bed, preparing to begin the formal brain death evaluation, I found myself paralyzed by uncertainty. What if this patient could also recover? What if my declaration of death was premature? What if there was consciousness trapped inside this seemingly lifeless body? I couldn't proceed with the evaluation. For the first time in my career, I was unable to perform a fundamental aspect of my job because I no longer trusted my own medical judgment. That night, I wrote my resignation letter. The case of Emily Harrington and the subsequent revelations about brain death recovery have fundamentally altered the practice of intensive care medicine in Australia. New protocols require extended observation periods, multiple confirmatory tests, and mandatory consultation with ethics committees before brain death can be declared. The psychological impact on medical professionals has been lasting. A survey conducted by the Australian Medical Association found that 40% of ICU physicians reported decreased confidence in brain death determinations following the Harrington case. Many, like myself, left intensive care medicine entirely. But perhaps the most profound impact has been on our understanding of consciousness itself. Emily Harrington's impossible recovery forced the medical community to confront the limitations of our knowledge about the nature of life and death. Research continues into the neurobiological mechanisms that might explain these recoveries. Some studies focus on quantum processes in brain tissue, others on the possibility of cellular regeneration that occurs only under extreme conditions. None have provided definitive answers. Meanwhile, Emily Harrington continues to live a normal life, teaching primary school and raising awareness about brain death issues. She has become an advocate for extended observation periods and more conservative approaches to brain death determination. "I don't pretend to understand what happened to me," she told a gathering of intensive care physicians last month. "But I know that I was somewhere else, and then I came back. Maybe we need to be more careful about deciding when someone is truly gone." The case has also sparked philosophical and religious debates about the nature of consciousness and the soul. Some interpret these recoveries as evidence of spiritual dimensions to human existence that science cannot measure. Others see them as proof that our understanding of neurobiology is still primitive. For me, Emily Harrington's case represents the most humbling experience of my medical career. It reminded me that despite all our advances in medical technology and understanding, there are still fundamental mysteries about human consciousness that we are only beginning to explore. As I write this, I'm working as a family physician in rural Victoria, treating conditions like diabetes and hypertension, medical problems with clear diagnostic criteria and established treatments. It's a simpler practice, but one that allows me to sleep at night without wondering whether the patients I declared dead might somehow still be alive. The case taught me that medicine is still as much art as science, and that the arrogance of absolute certainty can be dangerous when dealing with the mysteries of human consciousness. Emily Harrington came back from brain death to remind us that there is still so much we don't understand about the nature of life and death. Some mysteries are meant to humble us rather than be solved. Emily Harrington's impossible recovery will forever change how I view the boundary between life and death, and serve as a reminder that in medicine, we must always remain open to the possibility that our understanding is incomplete. The most disturbing thing about this case wasn't the challenge it posed to medical science. It was the realization that in our certainty, we may have been making irreversible decisions about patients whose true condition we didn't fully understand. That knowledge will stay with me for the rest of my life. Emily Harrington shouldn't have come back from brain death, but she did. And that impossible recovery will forever haunt every doctor who witnessed it, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth that in medicine, nothing is ever truly certain.